This is my main camera. It's a big, expensive full-frame Lumix S5 2X, paired with a 24 to 105 f4. Really great image quality. I can't complain about basically anything. This is a total workhouse. But I really don't tend to take this anywhere with me unless I'm getting paid. Partly because it's heavy, also it's expensive, but there's just something about this that doesn't invite the same kind of experimentation as what I'm looking for. So as a everyday carry lens and camera, I don't really take this out with me. Compare that to this little beast of a camera. What I've found is I actually do take this with me, but it's not just because it's smaller and lighter weight. So let's get into why I actually ended up bringing this with me all the time. I picked up this little Micro Four Thirds camera on Facebook Marketplace, and when I showed up, the screen was broken, so I talked the guy down to $80. Then I went on eBay and searched for this telephoto lens, which is an equivalent of an 80 to 300. Got this for about 50 bucks. But the main question you're probably asking is, why even bother with a setup like this compared to full frame detail and dynamic range that you get with that system? But let me just show you some of the shots I got with this exact setup, and then let's take a look at what I got and see if it's worth it. Honestly, to my eye, these results are quite acceptable. The highlights and the shadows retain quite a good amount of information, and it's relatively sharp. I'm not expecting amazing results from this, but it's more than good enough for what I'm doing. And what exactly is it that I'm trying to accomplish with this setup? Well, in short, it's about just having more fun with the process. I've definitely already figured out that having a small camera is quite advantageous to actually bringing it around and doing daily shots of street photography or landscapes and all that. But one of the problems was I was always limited by the lens selection, because to get a small compact full frame size, you're really only looking at a fixed focal length, maybe in a 50 millimeter to 28 millimeter range. But something that I've been finding over the last year is that I've really been gravitating towards the telephoto side of taking pictures. And there are some really interesting advantages that Micro Four Thirds has that I think a lot of people call limitations, but depending on your use case, they can actually be massive advantages. Starting with the crop factor. The 2x crop factor means that because of the smaller sensor, you don't need as big of a lens, but you're also multiplying everything by 2. So this is really a 40 to 150 lens, but it becomes 300 at the long run end because of that crop factor. And I honestly, this is about the same size as one of my primes. This is the same size as about the lens I'm recording on right now, the 35 to 1.8 lumix. The second being, you don't get as shallow of a depth of field. But honestly, when I'm doing it, I want more detail. I don't want to isolate things. I'm doing a lot of landscape photography and street photography type stuff, urban landscape stuff. And honestly, when I'm on full frame, sometimes it's just difficult to get all of the information in the shot. So this has actually been kind of amazing, where f11 on this lens just captures so much detail while still being at the kind of optimal point of the lens where it's 3 or 4 stops from wide open, where you get that optical performance at its peak. In fact, I've been liking telephoto so much that I went and picked up my largest lens so far. And this is a 80 to 400 from Nikon. I haven't been particularly impressed with the sharpness of this, honestly, but it is really a great focal length range. The only problem is, of course, when I add the adapter to get this on the mirrorless cameras I'm using, it's already 3.5 pounds plus the camera. I'm basically lifting weights at that point. And so as much as I really want to use this lens, it's just been difficult. Like, it requires going on a photo excursion as opposed to just walking down the street. I need a camera backpack for this. I need to figure out if it's worth bringing, if I'm really going to make the most out of the compression and the layered landscapes and the distant details that I'm looking for. So, unfortunately, outside of when I have a specific shot in mind, this has just been sitting on the shelf. Compare that to this, which I know is, 100 millimeters difference. You can find more telephoto lenses in micro four thirds, but this little thing is just kind of ridiculous at what it does. Like, you're looking at basically, if I take the lens hood off, this basically doubles in size and is kind of just a ridiculous powerhouse for what it actually does. Granted, it's not the sharpest or the best performing lens, but what it's really allowed me to do is experiment. That's really the main thing. And experimentation in photography is really something that I find fun. What I haven't been able to do on full frame is to experiment cheaply and in an everyday carry scenario, because the lenses are expensive, they're heavy. I care more about bringing them out along with the camera bodies. So I tend to, use it less. That's really it. So when I started carrying this setup, I would actually put it in my 3-liter tiny sling along with another camera. That's how compact it is. Or I would just put it on a camera sling and go to a friend's house with it, because it's just so nonchalant that I feel like it's totally fine to do that. So in that sense, it became something where I was able to use the 300 millimeters, which is a focal length that I haven't used a lot, on like an everyday basis, like without having to think about it or without being burdened by the weight and the expensive factor of full frame. And I think as photographers, we all know that sometimes your best shots are when you aren't planning it. You're just walking down the street and the timing or the lighting was in the optimal setting. And so you just happen to be there and be prepared with your camera. But with this, it's something that when I go on drives to take errands, like, this comes with me, because there's so many different layered shots in the Bay Area where you need the reach to really emphasize those layers and the compression that you can get from it. So a lot of my favorite shots that from the last maybe 6 months or so have been on this camera, and this was the only thing I had. I didn't even have a wide angle lens on me. So in that sense, it's really proven its worth. Now, I won't say that the quality is, the best that you can get from like a full frame Pro Series lens 70 to 200, but it's enough to really decide if that's something you want to get into, right? Because the cost for entry is so low that you can buy this lens, try it out, figure out that that's really not what you're even looking for, or maybe figure out that 200 millimeter full frame equivalent is all you need. So you don't even need the extra reach of a 300 millimeter. But you can do that for pennies compared to experimenting with full frame equipment. So what actual camera is this? Well, this is the Olympus OMD EM10 Mark II from, I believe, 2014. And it's paired with the Olympus 40 to 150 f4 to 5.6, which is on the budget range for their telephoto lens. But despite coming out over a decade ago, I feel like the photography side of this has really not increased in a crazy amount, other than things like convenience factors like autofocus speed and things like that. But at the time, this was based on the flagship EM1 and has a lot of the same features: amazing IBIS, excellent features. You can even send stuff to your phone. Like, it's quite an advanced camera despite being this old. While cameras have gotten better for the video specs a lot, and we're starting to see those plateau, I feel like on the photography side, they peaked sometime in the early 2010s or even earlier for DSLR, but for mirrorless, there haven't been that many uh, groundbreaking different technologies that have come out that actually improve the image quality. A lot of it has just been those convenience factors like better autofocus and everything. And if you're thinking 16 megapixels still isn't enough from an older Micro Four Thirds sensor, I think it's plenty, honestly. Because if you look at posting to social media like Instagram, I think you're using 6 megapixels or something like that. So it's plenty for that. For print, it's still good enough. I think short of doing anything like a commercial billboard, you're really not going to find a big difference from a 16 megapixel sensor to a 24 megapixel, for instance. What I've found that you can actually do if you're still looking for a little bit more richness in the image is the panorama stitch feature in Lightroom, which I've used to create a couple landscape shots where I stitched a bunch together. So 5 times 16 megapixels, and then you get a massive canvas to work with. So really, I think with all the new technology we have on the post-processing side, that becomes more and more of a mute point. Okay, so just beyond the pixels and the increase in resolution on the newer cameras, the only two areas that I feel a little bit held back from sometimes on this when using this camera is the dynamic range, where you have really high contrast scenes and you need to capture both the brights and the darks, which sometimes I've been forced to meter for two different scenes, really meter for the highlights and then meter for the shadows, and do an HDR merge in Lightroom. Not a huge deal, but something you have to be aware of. And then the other thing is higher ISOs, better low light performance. And really, those are the only two things that I immediately noticed with this camera. But given that you're shooting with a good lens, good lighting, it's really something that I didn't notice until I was really stress testing the camera at nighttime. So this really isn't about just being cheap. It's really about removing friction in the photography creative process. I'm definitely not precious with this camera or lens, and I experiment more because of it, take more chances, and ultimately just use it more on a day-to-day basis, where it definitely merits a place. And so if you're interested in even experimenting with other focal lengths, it is a tempting proposition to just pick up a cheap older camera with a crop sensor, specifically Micro Four Thirds, in my opinion, just because of how cheap it is, how abundant the lenses are. And all of that is to encourage experimentation. Like, I know we've all heard that the best camera is the one that you have with you. And I don't know if, like, I'm tired of hearing that, honestly, but what I do know is that the best telephoto lens is the one that's smaller than a soda can, because you're just going to be able to get so much more use out of this on your daily photo walks. So in short, that's kind of where I'm going in 2026, is trying to find ways where the gear removes friction and provides room for exploration and experimentation. And for that reason alone, Micro Four Thirds is quite a good value proposition. But if you're interested to see how I have kitted out my full frame camera as more of a everyday carry option, check out this video below, because I think there are certain things you can do on the full frame side of it to really make it a more practical choice for lightweight everyday carry.